and using the grid as a backup. And the power plants that you're using as a backup aren't being paid enough to stay in business because they're not used enough. And so it gets to be very complicated. And by the way, I want to say that when people begin talking about, well, we have to decarbonize with wind and solar, every now and again I just say, hey, nuclear. And sometimes people go, oh, well, anything but that. I mean, yeah, there's greenhouse gases and global warming, but you mentioned something that's even worse. And I don't think it's even worse, but that I think it's it's the important part of any kind of decarbonization or any stability. Well, I think it is part of the solution. And I want to say that all these things that the states are voting on and RECs and we can do it all on renewables and so forth and so on, these are all policy decisions that don't have a whole lot to do with how the physical grid works. I mean, you can reverse a policy decision by signing a piece of paper. The right people have to sign. What I mean is that if you close down a nuclear plant, and many have been closed down, it is almost certainly going to be replaced by fossil fuels. It is going to be replaced by. You say, oh, but we're building renewables. You close down that nuclear plant, and your percentage fossil fuel will go up because the renewables won't be there all the time that the nuclear plant was. I think it's always going to be uncomfortably expensive to do that. And let me give you my ideas on that. Let's say you have an ordinary grid, okay, just a regular old grid with different kinds of power plants on it, maybe some renewables, but mostly regular power plants. You keep enough power plants on the grid for 20% more than you expect the highest demand to be. That way, if there's a power plant offline or there's some kind of interruption on a transmission to some power plant, you still could satisfy the highest demand. And that has worked well for tens of years. Okay, now let's say we're going to go to a grid, and let's imagine we have storage and it's grid level and so forth. Now, I don't think they're going to be building a lot of pump storage. So when I say storage, I'm going to say some type of battery, okay? Because I can't imagine anybody in this country saying, oh yeah, why don't you just take a section of that mountain down and make a reservoir there and then put a bunch of turbines at the base by the river and up in the mountain? Yeah, it'll work. It will work, absolutely. But I don't think they're going to build a bunch of them. So here we have, for example, a set of wind turbines, for example, and let's say they can make 100% of the power needed by the grid, and they're ready, and the wind is blowing, and they're doing great. Well, fine. Who is charging up that battery? You need another wind turbine when the wind is blowing great to charge the battery for when the wind isn't blowing great, and then you need a battery. So where before you needed 1.2 times the amount of megawatts that are used by the grid at full tilt, now you need 3 times the wind turbine that's making power for the grid, the wind turbine that's making power for the battery, and the battery. I don't mean to be discouraging, but you just count. It's just a matter of counting. First of all, we have a lot of uranium in the U.S. and in especially in Canada. The reason we import from Russia is we don't have uranium. It's expensive, more expensive here to mine it, and also we don't have facilities to turn the raw uranium into fuel pellets, and we buy the fuel pellets from Russia. So at any rate, I am very clear on what my perfect grid would be. My perfect grid would be a lot of nuclear plants running base load. And people say, oh, there is no such thing as base load. But no, there is. Base load is whatever amount of energy is needed from the grid 24 hours a day. And that turns out to be about 2/3 of the energy on the grid. The heights, like when we get up in the morning and turn on the lights, that's only for part of the 24 hours, and it's actually doesn't usually go as high as to double what was base load. So at any rate, so you have base load for nuclear for the base load part. Then what about the load following? Well, load following, I think for load following, there might be new nuclear. There could be natural gas and renewables, natural gas backing up the renewables. You understand that now we're looking at a third of the energy on the grid, not the whole thing, and we're letting the renewables be a big portion of it, and then the natural gas be some of it. So the thing is, the grid, the actual grid we have out there is like 80% or 78% or whatever percent fossil fuel. That's what's going on, okay? And then there's 20% nuclear and about 15-20% renewables. Okay, 60% fossil fuel. I think it's more like 70 actually. But at any rate, maybe it's 60. But what I'm saying is that's what's really out there. And then people are beginning to say, no, we have to look at how we can completely decarbonize. And I'm like, hey, how about you have 60% decarbonization and 20% natural gas and 20% renewables. That'd be much better if you're looking at decarbonizing. But people go like, oh no, it doesn't get us where we need to be. And I'm like, this is not reasonable. I mean, you may say we need to be at zero, but that means that you're saying 10% is really unacceptable. It's not. I mean, I don't know. I'm rather pragmatic. If I wanted to buy a new car, I wouldn't say, well, I need this car to be top of the line. I would buy the car that fit what I could buy, And similarly, even if, people are very concerned with global warming, which I don't think they are, or they would be pro-nuclear. But at any rate, wouldn't it be lovely if we could electrify everything with mostly nuclear? That was a whole section I had in the book called FERC 1000 Flies Under the Radar. And basically, it isn't even about the Regional Transmission Organization. It used to be in terms of transmission, and used to be is like up to like 10 years ago or 5 years ago, is the goal in transmission was the people who take advantage of it pay for it. So, for example, many transmission lines were what was called socialized. That is, they might run through Vermont, but Vermont doesn't pay 100% of it. Vermont pays whatever percentage of costs are Vermont's portion of the local grid. So Vermont is only 4% of the local grid. Connecticut, Boston, they're all in the grid. They use huge amounts. So if there was a new transmission line that the grid operator says we must have this for reliability, Vermont would pay 4% of the cost, and good old Massachusetts would pay probably 50% or maybe 40% in Connecticut. Anyway, what I'm saying is that it would be paid for in percentage of how much you use it. Now, with the recent FERC 1000, the idea is that you would socialize costs, that is, spread them over a bigger area, if the costs were necessary for state policies, which means that I could have a state policy that I need to import wind power from wherever I can get it, including Canada, including the Midwest, whatever, and I need transmission lines for it. That's my policy. And according to FERC 1000, that would be socialized. All the different states would use it, pay for it, and not use it necessarily. It might be my state's policy, and I'm happy as a clam with it because the other states are paying for my policy. They haven't had a chance to vote on it. They can't throw the bums out if they don't like it, but they're paying for my policy. And I find that really appalling. Now, if you remember back when I talked about how I had joined the consumer liaison group, somebody called me up and said, why don't you join it? And I said, oh, okay, I'll come to some meetings. Maybe I'll join it. And the person who called me, I asked him why he was in it. And he said, at one point I realized that I could be taxed through my utility bill, and I would not know anything about it, and I would not be able to stop it. And that's why I decided to join this group and see if I could do something about it. consumer liaison group was open to reporters and so forth, and they all came because all the other meetings were closed, and the closed meetings are where the decisions are being made. On the other hand, my feeling is that if you can't change things, you're never going to be able to change things if people don't even know they're happening. And so I felt that tell people it's happening is worthwhile. But no, the consumer liaison group was just kind of in one way, it was just a talking point, a bunch of people talking. In another way,